So if your power goes out at home, you don't immediately assume the local power plant just exploded.
Right, no, you assume a tree branch hit a line or something.
Exactly, or like a neighborhood transformer blew. You automatically recognize it as a network failure. So why is it that when we feel chronically exhausted or sluggish or, I don't know, hit that massive wall at 2 p.m., we just automatically assume our biological power plant is completely broken or just empty?
I mean, it is a massive blind spot. We are trained basically from birth to view human health with this comforting expectation of mechanical precision.
Like an old school machine.
Yeah, exactly. Like you break a bone, the x-ray shows a jagged white line, and the doctor literally points to it, broken or not broken. We want a single visible culprit for every single symptom we have.
But then you step into the incredibly murky landscape of daily energy, right? And fatigue and systemic health, and that x-ray machine is just utterly useless. So today we are bringing you a deep dive into a framework that totally dismantles how we understand our own bodies. We are looking at a really fascinating paper by Dr. Lev Motin.
Yes.
It's titled A Probabilistic Risk Assessment Framework for Human Energy Flow Systems.
And the mission of this deep dive is to really explore a radical shift in perspective. Instead of analyzing human physiology as a collection of separate, isolated organs, where the heart does one job and the liver does another, we're going to look at the body using the rigorous engineering logic of probabilistic risk assessment, or PRA.
And before we even get into what PRA means, there is this incredible image right at the beginning of the source material that just completely sets the stage. Imagine a diagram of a human silhouette, but instead of showing the usual skeleton or organs, it's lit up with glowing, interconnected networks.
It's a great visual.
It really is. It looks like a satellite view of Earth at night,
Yeah.
or like a complex, highly advanced smart grid. And the text overlay reads, from energy quantity to energy accessibility. It points out distributed energy networks, a nervous infrastructure control system, and different failure modes.
And that visual is crucial because it captures the central premise here. In traditional linear thinking, we assume a biological system fails when energy is simply lost.
Right.
But this PRA model argues that a system actually fails when energy cannot reach where and when it is needed. It's an accessibility problem. It is not a quantity problem.
Okay, let's unpack this because we really need to completely trash the metaphor most of us grew up with. I've always visualized the human body like, well, a car's gas tank.
Most people do.
Right. You eat food, which acts as the gas. You burn it by moving around. And if you are feeling tired, it simply means your tank is low. You just need to put more gas in. Eat a snack, get a quick burst of energy. But if this gas tank model is fundamentally wrong, how should we be visualizing our internal energy system?
Well, we need to replace the gas tank with what the paper calls a coordinated energy accessibility network.
Okay.
Going back to your opening analogy, think of a sprawling power grid. The ultimate goal of a power grid isn't to constantly burn coal or, run wind turbines at maximum capacity just for the sake of it.
Because that would just blow out the wires.
Exactly. The goal is controlled availability.
Huh.
A healthy human body isn't trying to rev the engine as hard as possible at all times.
It's about having the power ready to flip on the second you hit the light switch without constantly blazing away in the background.
That is the goal. Because the body isn't a centralized engine. It operates on a layered, distributed architecture made up of channels and nodes.
Channels and nodes, got it.
Yeah, so the channels are essentially your transit pathways, your large arteries, the massive sprawling capillary beds, right down to the tiny membranes of individual cells. That is how energy substrates and oxygen literally travel. But the real magic, and really the real vulnerability, lies in the nodes.
When you say nodes, we are talking about biological gatekeepers, right? Like traffic lights on this transit pathway.
They are exactly like traffic lights. They're regulatory checkpoints. For instance, the intestinal wall is an absorption node. It decides what actually gets into the blood.
Oh, okay.
The liver is a massive buffering and transformation node. It can store energy or release it based on demand. And at the microscopic level, cellular membranes are nodes that decide what substrates are allowed inside the cell to actually be burned.
I mean, I can see how that distributed design creates incredible resilience.
Yeah.
If you have a local issue like a cut on your arm or a cramped calf muscle, your whole body doesn't just spontaneously shut down. The grid just routes around it.
Exactly.
But the paper points out that this exact same distributed structure introduces a massive new risk, the risk of delayed flow at literally any single one of those microscopic traffic lights.
And that brings us to how power is actually generated within this grid. Energy isn't manufactured in one giant factory in the stomach and shipped out fully formed. It's produced locally.
Right at the source.
Yes. Every single cell has its own microscopic power plants called mitochondria. They take the substrates delivered by the channels and convert them into ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. And that is the actual usable energy currency the cell can spend.
And the storage of that energy is just as decentralized. You don't have one big battery pack sitting behind your stomach. The body maintains a temporal ladder of storage.
A temporal ladder,
Like
yes.
you have immediate, rapid turnover, local pools of ATP that last, what, seconds?
Barely seconds.
Right. Then you have short-term buffers like glycogen stored right inside your muscle tissue for when you suddenly need to sprint for a bus. And then you have the long-term reserves, which is your adipose tissue or body fat.
But here is the critical part. All of those local generators and storage units, they need instructions. They don't magically know what the rest of the body is doing.
So who's telling them?
The nervous system. The paper highlights that the nervous system doesn't actually produce any metabolic energy itself, but it acts as the supervisory layer. It dictates vascular tone, meaning it commands your blood vessels to dilate or constrictively. It allocates resources, and it prioritizes which tissues get the fuel.
It's acting like an air traffic controller at a major international airport.
Yes, perfect analogy.
The airplanes are the energy. They are fueled up, the pilots are ready, the passengers are buckled in. But if the air traffic controller is overwhelmed or like sending out conflicting signals, those planes are grounded. It doesn't matter how much jet fuel you have.
Not at all.
Which makes me wonder, wait, why would my body intentionally restrict flow? The paper calls this regulated inadequacy, but deliberately starving my muscles of energy sounds like an evolutionary design flaw, not a biological feature.
I know, it sounds counterintuitive,
Okay.
but it's a vital protection mechanism. Let's say you are bleeding or exposed to freezing temperatures. The control system deliberately restricts blood flow to your extremities to keep your core organs warm and functioning.
Oh.
That is a regulated inadequacy.
Mm-hmm.
The system is proactively choosing to make your hands weak and cold to save your heart and brain.
So the control system is playing favorites to keep us alive.
It absolutely has to.
Yeah.
But the danger arises when these control nodes become too slow, or they narrow the channels at the wrong time, or, and this is big, they fail to open back up when the threat has passed.
Right, they get stuck.
Yeah. And when that happens, you experience a functional decline. You feel exhausted or weak. But there's no structural damage. Nothing is broken on an X-ray. The control system just failed to open the network proportionately to your current need.
Okay, if that's the overarching vulnerability, let's actually look at the mechanics of how this goes wrong. Because the framework doesn't just say the grid fails. It categorizes failure into a taxonomy of 6 specific modes. And this isn't just a textbook list. This is the literal mechanism of why we feel awful sometimes.
So the first two are fairly straightforward. There is supply failure, which is the literal lack of foundational inputs. You haven't eaten or you're at high altitude and lack oxygen.
Simple enough.
Then there is transport failure. The fuel is in the body, but the highway system is compromised. Maybe your blood pressure is too low, or you have poor circulation, so the flow rate can't meet the demand of the tissue.
Okay, those make intuitive sense. But the next ones are where the gatekeeper concept really clicks. What happens when the fuel actually reaches the tissue?
That's where you can have entry failure. The fuel substrates and oxygen travel down the highway. They arrive at the cell membrane, but they are blocked from going inside.
The door is locked.
Right. The receptors on the cell might be desensitized or malfunctioning.
And even if it gets aside, you can have conversion failure. The fuel is in the cell, but the mitochondria, the engine room, are acting sluggish. Wait, why would they do that?
Oh, a number of reasons. Mitochondria can be damaged by oxidative stress, or they might lack specific micronutrient cofactors needed to run the chemical reactions. They simply can't spin the raw materials into that usable ATP fast enough.
Wow. Okay, then we have storage failure. The energy is technically saved up, maybe as glycogen in the liver, but the biochemical signals to mobilize it and release it into the bloodstream are delayed.
Yes. And finally, allocation failure, which goes back to our air traffic controller. The nervous system simply prioritizes the wrong tissues, shunting blood flow away from your digestive tract when you are trying to digest a heavy meal, for example.
Understanding those 6 mechanisms leads us to the most vital concept in this entire PRA framework: spatiotemporal mismatch. Spatial mismatch means the energy absolutely exists in the total system of your body, but the specific local tissues that need it are starved.
Exactly. You might have thousands of calories stored as body fat, but your hands are freezing and lacking the actual energy to grip a steering wheel.
And temporal mismatch is when the energy does arrive, but it gets there too late to be functionally useful. Here's where it gets really interesting because it's like a fire department.
Oh, I like this.
A city might have the best trucks, the most water, and highly trained firefighters, but if they show up an hour after the house burned down, it doesn't matter that the resources existed. The system still failed. How does this change how we view everyday complaints, like, afternoon sluggishness or brain fog during a stressful meeting?
It changes the entire paradigm. It tells us that those symptoms are very often just latency or response time failures. The total energy you need to stay alert and focused is absolutely present in your body.
It's sitting right there.
Right, but the accessibility window was missed. Your network didn't shift the allocation of resources to your brain fast enough to meet the sudden cognitive demand of that meeting. You don't need to eat a candy bar to add more fuel to the gas tank. You need your control system to release the fuel that's already in the grid.
Wow. And the scary part is, these little microscopic delays don't just happen in a vacuum, they team up. The paper talks about cascades.
Yes, cascades are terrifyingly common.
A tiny initial mismatch gets amplified by biological feedback loops. Let's say your local blood flow to your leg is just a little weak. That leads to slightly less ATP production in that specific calf muscle. Because the muscle lacks ATP, it feels heavy, so you don't want to walk around as much.
Naturally.
But because you aren't moving, your overall circulation drops even further, which means even less oxygen gets to the leg, dropping the ATP even lower.
And this is where the engineering concept of probabilistic risk assessment really shines. In PRA, engineers look for minimal cut sets.
Minimal cut sets.
Yeah, whether you are assessing a nuclear power plant or a human body, a minimal cut set is the smallest combination of component failures that will cause the entire system to degrade.
So if we ground this in an everyday scenario, it explains why you feel like absolute garbage on certain days. Let's say you got poor sleep, which causes a 10% drop in your nervous system's allocation efficiency.
Okay, sure.
Then you skip breakfast, creating a minor supply delay. And you are sitting in a freezing cold office, which demands heat production. Individually, none of those are diseases, but together.
Together, they complete the minimal cut set. They cross a threshold. A slight transport delay, plus a minor storage mobilization delay, plus the stress of the cold environment causes your system to cascade into brain fog and physical exhaustion.
But modern medicine is so obsessed with finding the single root cause. We want the one bad metric on a blood test. The one broken link. Is this framework basically suggesting we need to stop looking for the one bad guy and start looking for the gang instead?
Absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the framework argues that because our body's design is distributed, our vulnerabilities are combinational. Your health isn't just about having structurally intact organs, it is about what the author calls spatiotemporal coherence.
Let's define that for a second. Spatiotemporal coherence. It sounds like a physics term.
It essentially means your body is like a symphony orchestra. It isn't enough for all the instruments to be present on the stage. They have to play in perfect time with each other. If the strings are rushing and the brass section is lagging, the music sounds terrible, even if none of the instruments are actually broken.
That makes total sense.
That is a loss of coherence. And importantly, this risk is state-dependent. A particular biological node might work perfectly when you are fully rested and well-fed. But put that same node under the stress of cold or sleep deprivation, and suddenly it's the weak link that triggers a cascade.
That makes so much intuitive sense, but I really want to move from the theoretical to the highly practical. To prove this isn't just an abstract engineering model, the source material actually applies this PRA framework to 3 very different real-world case studies in its appendix. Let's look at the first one, cold sensitivity. We all know people who just always feel freezing, even in a mild room.
Right. And conventionally, we just wave a hand and say, oh, they have poor circulation. But through the PRA lens, cold sensitivity is a perfect example of a transport, allocation, and local production mismatch.
Okay, so how does that work?
Remember our discussion on regulated inadequacy. The body's control system is actually doing its job too aggressively. It's prioritizing your core organs by dropping peripheral blood flow to your skin and extremities.
So the allocation system is hoarding the heat.
Right. But simultaneously, the local production nodes, the microscopic muscle fibers in your arms and legs, are under-responding. They aren't generating heat fast enough to compensate for the dropped blood flow.
So the physical energy is there, the fat stores are there, but the core won't share it. And that perfectly explains why sudden movement fixes it so quickly. If you stand up and do 20 jumping jacks, you aren't spontaneously adding calories to your body.
No, not at all.
You are fixing the temporal mismatch. You are forcing the local nodes in your legs to demand energy, which overrides the central control system and forces the transport channels to reopen. You are forcibly shifting the accessibility. Now let's use that causality to look at a much more serious systemic issue: insulin resistance. If cold sensitivity is the body trying to protect itself, what happens when the control system actually breaks down and traps the fuel?
Oh, this is huge.
Yeah. Conventional medicine largely views insulin resistance as just a blood sugar problem, right? A stepping stone to type 2 diabetes.
But in the PRA framework, insulin resistance is the ultimate entry node failure. It is a massive cellular traffic jam. Your blood is literally flooded with glucose. There's an absolute abundance of fuel sitting right there in the transport channels. But the target tissues, like your skeletal muscles, are actively ignoring the insulin signal. They are keeping the cellular doors locked shut.
Which means insulin resistance is fundamentally a problem of congestion, not just excess fuel. The glucose is trapped in the hallway and can't get into the rooms.
Yeah.
And this creates a terrifying feedback loop. What does the supervisory control system do when it senses the network is heavily congested?
It panics.
It overcompensates. The pancreas starts pumping out massive, abnormal amounts of insulin, desperately trying to force those entry nodes to open.
The pancreas goes into total endocrine overdrive. It's just screaming at the cells to open the doors.
It is. And for a while, this compensation masks the underlying problem. Your blood sugar might even look totally normal on a basic test. But the entire network is operating under intense, unsustainable strain.
Because the background insulin is so high.
Yes, because insulin is also an allocation hormone. This massive surge shifts how your body stores fat. It drives systemic inflammation. And eventually, the pancreas exhausts its reserve capacity. It burns out. The system transitions into a persistent, degraded state. The energy was always in the body, but the loss of regulated cellular entry caused the entire network to cascade into failure.
So what does this all mean for something even more mysterious and complex, like our third case study, chronic fatigue? And specifically, the paper mentions conditions overlapping with ME/CFS. Wait, before we go further, for listeners who might only know the colloquial term chronic fatigue, what exactly does ME/CFS entail biologically?
Well, ME/CFS stands for myalgic encephalomyelitis, or chronic fatigue syndrome. It is a severe systemic neuroimmune disease. It isn't just feeling a little tired. It's profound, debilitating exhaustion that isn't improved by rest.
Right, it's not just needing a nap.
Not at all. And within this PRA framework, ME/CFS is perhaps the ultimate test of the theory. The paper characterizes it as a low-coherence multi-node state.
So the orchestra is completely out of sync.
Entirely. There isn't one single broken organ you can remove or fix. Instead, it's a combinational failure involving a devastating double-time problem.
A double time problem, meaning slow activation on the front end and slow restoration on the back end.
Exactly. When a physical or cognitive demand is placed on the body, the transport and energy production nodes are too sluggish to scale up to meet it. The patient feels immediate exhaustion. But then, crucially, when the activity stops, the recovery nodes are abnormally prolonged. They cannot clear the metabolic byproducts and restore the baseline quickly.
And that leads to the defining symptom of ME/CFS, post-exertional malaise, or PM. The system is penalized not just during the physical effort, but for hours, days, or even weeks afterward.
Yes. Post-exertional malaise is the physical manifestation of a cascading network failure.
It completely reminds me of the concept of pacing that specialists recommend for ME/CFS patients. If your body is this heavily coupled, highly sensitive power grid, pacing isn't about being lazy.
No, absolutely not.
It is literally about not tripping the biological circuit breakers. If your recovery nodes are lagging, a massive surge of demand doesn't just drain the battery, it blows the fuses. It causes a system-wide blackout that takes days to reboot.
That is an incredibly accurate way to visualize it. In chronic fatigue, coherence itself is the scarce resource. If a patient or a doctor tries to intervene just by forcing more effort or prescribing graded exercise to just push through it, they are completely ignoring the severe latency in the system.
But making it worse.
They are triggering a massive cascading penalty. The goal of any intervention has to be about fixing the interacting delays, restoring flow, and operating strictly within the network's highly sensitive recovery envelope.
Okay, this has been a profound shift in how we look at human physiology. For you listening to this, here is the core takeaway to really wrap your head around. Your body is not a bucket holding energy. It is a highly intelligent, rapidly shifting, distributed energy network.
Very well said.
When you feel sluggish, weak, or fatigued, you aren't necessarily failing because you lack energy. You are failing because the microscopic gates, the transit channels, and the nervous system fail to synchronize that energy's delivery across space and time. It's not about how much fuel you have in the tank, it's about accessibility, timing, and coherence.
And that leads to one final, deeply provocative thought that we want to leave you with today. It draws from a fascinating section in the paper's appendix on what engineers call initiating events.
Okay, initiating events.
Right. We've established that your physiological risk is state-dependent. Your internal network relies on constant, coordinated movement and shifting environmental demand to keep those channels open and the nodes highly responsive.
The system requires a little bit of stress to know how to manage flow. But look at our modern world. We live in highly engineered, climate-controlled environments. We sit at ergonomic desks for 8 hours a day.
It's true.
We rarely experience extreme temperature shifts, and we certainly don't face immediate physical demands to survive. We've engineered almost all the physical friction out of our daily lives.
We have. But if the body's grid literally requires demand to maintain its synchronization, how does our increasingly sedentary, deeply comfortable lifestyle act as a slow, invisible, initiating event? Are we quietly shifting our baseline probability for these cascading failures? By never forcing the network to rapidly mobilize, are we letting the biological gates rust shut long before we ever actually feel sick?
That is something to seriously mull over the next time you instinctively adjust the thermostat or, decide to skip a quick walk outside. Because as we've learned today, the medical X-ray machine might not show anything broken, but the glowing, pulsing grid of your accessibility network tells the real story. We'll leave you to think on that.